Good evening. I'm Charles Solomon. I'm your host for this evening. And we have a very impressive panel of artists from the film you just saw. We have the director, we have the co-writer, we have the cinematographer, we have the art director, and we have the editor. And here they is. Gints Zilbalodis, who created the film that you just saw. So please have a seat. On your previous films, you've worked pretty much entirely by yourself. What was it like to shift to working with a crew and, you know, a number of artists that you had to delegate work to in a way you hadn't in your previous films?
Yeah, so it was a challenge. I was quite anxious about that. I've never worked in a studio as an animator, and now I had to be in charge of the studio, and I had to, for the first time, articulate my thoughts and kind of explain my ideas before I could just make it myself. And yeah, it's a lot of responsibility, which I always felt. But yeah, it was great actually. When I wrote the script, I had all these anxieties, so that's why in the film the characters were always fighting. And actually, it was a lot more smooth and easy, the actual production. But yeah, it was intentional to kind of make a story about that. My first film, it kind of happened as an accident, that it was about my own experience, but I really kind of felt like that's something that people resonated with, so I did this time kind of more intentionally. And yeah, the good thing about working in a team is you have to explain things, and you have to have a reason for them to be there. And there's more, I guess, intentionality and kind of purpose for everything, which is great because you always have to pitch things and things are challenged. But the one thing, also it can be dangerous of kind of having things be too direct and too kind of, yeah, you can lose some of that edge in some way like that. When there's when it's made by a committee, so we try to kind of find a balance where it is kind of polished in this way, but there are still some imperfections which were intentional, which were left in the film as well.
Well, and when you're doing something by yourself, you don't have to worry about, say, model sheets, because you know how to draw the character. That's why there are no model sheets of Cruella de Vil, because Mark Davis did all her scenes. So he knew what she looked like. You didn't have to give them, you had to, I assume for the first time, do model sheets of the characters so that the animators could all draw them or work with them.
Yeah, so basically because it's 3D animation, we didn't draw the characters really.
Yes,
but yeah, I would actually design the main characters directly. Well, basically I modeled them, so I didn't even draw them. And but yeah, it was basically the team is very small, and it was great that we could work very directly, and there wasn't many supervisors. And what was important for me, that I had this very well prepared plan, this animatic, but if the crew has good suggestions, then we would try to incorporate them. And I've heard sometimes in bigger productions it takes time to just to get these ideas to the director, and but in this case it was always one-to-one communication, and an animator would suggest something and they could send me the file, and I could very quickly make adjustments to the camera or the set and send it back to them in 20 minutes. So this allowed us to be very flexible, and yeah.
You've said that you got interested in films as an adolescent, that your father showed you a lot of work and you got more interested in them. Do you remember the first animation you saw, and did you look at the earlier Latvian films that had been created during the Soviet era in your country?
I don't remember the first anime. I was taught that I was brought to see The Lion King when I was less than a year old, so I don't really remember that. But,
that's a little early.
Yeah, I don't remember the first really experience, and I wasn't really influenced by Latvian films. I don't think so. I wasn't even that influenced by animation. I think I'm more influenced by some live action filmmakers and how they tell stories with the camera and the editing and I wanted to have that immersive feeling where the camera is participating in the storytelling and it's following the characters, and I wanted to use these long takes to create that sense of immersion and to convey ideas with the camera, where it can also sometimes, it's a very subjective point of view of kind of helping us to feel like the cat in the film, but also sometimes the camera is acting like a character in its own right, and it's sometimes curious and gets distracted by something, and sometimes it's afraid. And yeah, I think because there is no dialogue, I can kind of push things a little bit further. I can be somewhat more expressive with the camera and with all of the tools, with the music and sound as well.
Well, that brings up a question. You lead into the next question very nicely. Is I've often written that animation is very often at its best when there is no dialogue, when it's mime and acting to some sound. And I wondered if you have never used dialogue in any of the films of yours that I've seen. Do you also study silent films, or what is the appeal of no dialogue for you?
Yes, I've never had dialogue in any of the films I've done. I think I'm very visually minded person. I think in those terms, and for me that isn't like a big challenge. For me, doing films with dialogue would be like a bigger challenge actually, and I think it's also good to have some limitations to kind of, because in animation you can do whatever you want, and that can be make it hard to begin when you have infinite possibilities. And having no dialogue also forces me to kind of come up with original ways to convey these ideas. I can't just tell them. I can't tell what the characters are feeling, or what's the backstory of all this. I need to find ways that are somewhat more unconventional, and it forces me to kind of challenge myself. And I'm a fan of some silent films, especially Buster Keaton, and The General is one of my favorite films. The way how simple the story is. I think in silent films it's beneficial to keep the plot as simple as possible, so you can build on top of that with other tools and all kinds of expressions. So it was important that it didn't feel like they're just aimlessly lost at sea, but they have this goal, and it was important that we understand the characters, and that happens not just with the animation, of course, which is important, but with the sound and the way that the camera is framing them. I think it really helps us to kind of get into their heads. So yeah, I did study sound.
Does the lack of dialogue require you to do work more carefully with the composer and finding music to bolster the kind of imagery that you're talking about? There were two composers on this film, I believe, and again, does it call for the sound to do more to help tell the story when there are no words?
Yeah, so I'm one of those composers, so that made it easier.
See, we have the composer too.
So yeah, for me, describing my intention for music is very difficult. It's so subjective, and so I write the music when I'm still writing the script, even before the script is finished. So not only to kind of find the tone and the tempo, but even ideas for the scenes. There's the scene with the cat and the bird and the towers, which is a good example in which the music really gave me the idea of what actually would happen, because I couldn't figure it out. But once I had this piece of music, it really clicked for me. And for me, writing the script is probably the most difficult part. I can't really do it for a long time. So when I get stuck, I try to work on the music as a way of procrastination and to kind of figure it out. And because music is probably my most favorite part. It's really fun, and unlike animation, you can create something in a few hours and it's finished. So I also, it's great that I didn't have to use stem score. I can just edit the film using the original music, and I actually don't write music thinking about specific scenes. I just play, and don't know where I'll end up with, and then I try in the edit different pieces, and it's I write 5 times more material than ends up being used, so I can try it with this piece or that piece, and sometimes I get some ideas from that as well. And the good thing is I can always go back and forth. I might adjust the edits to fit the music, and then I can also adjust the music to fit with the edit. And so yeah, that's how it started. But my knowledge with music is pretty limited. I didn't study it, and with my first film, the music was somewhat more minimalistic, so I think I could like manage it myself. But this time we needed more help, so we brought on another composer, Richard Zaljup, who's much more experienced than me, and he's also like a performer. So many of the solos he performed himself. But not only that, he would like also take these themes which I had written, not thinking about specific scenes, and he would make them more specific to that exact moment and make sure that it's more cohesive and the themes are developed throughout the film. And so we also recorded the full orchestra. For me, that was really amazing to like hear those themes which I'd written just on my laptop to be actually played by the orchestra. It was really great. And also, in terms of the music, I wanted some scenes with just the music, with almost no sound effects, and like some of these cues are developed for like 5 continuous minutes. And sometimes in animation, I feel like the music tends to be all like changing so much very quickly. But I wanted to leave have enough time for the cues to really be developed and like really delve deeper into them. But at the same time, there are some scenes with no music for a very long time, where it's just the sound effects. And actually, I thought our sound designer would be really excited about it, but he told me that he was very anxious to have all that responsibility, and he wasn't able to hide behind the music or the voices. So it was a lot of pressure for the sound designer.
Why did you choose a cat as the main character? I mean, as a cat owner, I'm happy to see them getting work, but what was, I mean, do you have a cat that suggested him to you, or where did the character come from?
Well, basically, I had a cat like that when I was in high school, and I made a short film about the cat who was afraid of water. Back then, it was a simple hand-drawn short, but that was just about the cat and its fear of water, which is how everything started. I didn't want to have any antagonists in the film, so basically it's the cat versus nature kind of story, or in this case, maybe it's more like the cat versus itself. But so later I decided to adapt it into this feature version, but the water wasn't that interesting really to me anymore. I really wanted to focus on the other, like the relationship with the other animals. So the water is basically like the metaphor for those fears. So when the cat is afraid of the animals, it's also the water is very scary. And when it starts to open up with them, the water becomes more like peaceful and beautiful. So it started with the cat, and I thought like it's also with cats are great because we can show them like behaving like not very like, they can be like bastards on the screen. They're not very pleasant, but I think we forgive them because they're so cute. And if it would be a person, I think we wouldn't like trust this character so much.
Among the animals it meets are a capybara, which is a South American animal, and the lemurs, who are from Madagascar. I assume you were very deliberate in choosing to make your setting very vague geographically.
Yeah, I have. Basically, I was asked like, how do these animals learn to steer the boat? And I thought maybe they were all movie animals, and they were trained to perform these tricks. So they escaped from a movie set. That's why they're all in the same place.
That would explain it. You also leave some elements of the story unexplained. You know, where is the flood coming from? Where does it go? And there are no humans, yet there are human artifacts. There are houses and the carvings that the cat sees. What leads you to that sort of incomplete story? You don't wrap everything up in a bow the way a Hollywood movie would, that there are things left unknown or uncertain. And I'm curious about that approach to your filmmaking.
I think I focused on things that are interesting. I didn't like want to spend time on like giving like exposition about like what happened, and I don't write like long backstories of what happened. I don't really know all that, and I think it's also more interesting where the audience has to kind of participate in the storytelling process, where it's not just spoon-fed to them, where you're given the clues and you have to be like this detective to put them together yourself, and then you're more actively participating in the film, and yeah. So what I really focused on is the characters, and it doesn't really matter where the flood came from or why it went away. And so I wanted to streamline it as much as possible, and I wasn't really interested in the humans. It was never a consideration to put any people in the film. I feel like we've seen a story like this from a human point of view, but we've never really experienced it from an animal point of view, which I think it makes it a lot more emotionally engaging, and everything seems so much bigger, like seeing it from this point of view. And I think for better or worse, we care more about animals than we care about humans, and so yeah, that was always my intention.
Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to make the film in Blender rather than one of the more elaborate software package systems that we're used to seeing from American studios?
I think Blender is every bit as good as any of the other softwares, and it's. I think for like smaller productions, I know like bigger productions it can be difficult to like switch these pipelines, but for smaller productions, it's not that big of a deal. And our animators, it took like for most of them like a week just to like switch, and many of them also had used Blender as well. But yeah, as well, of course, it's helpful in a smaller production to use something that's free, just kind of save these resources. But also, it's very like we can customize it. We could make like custom tools for it, and also it was actually rendered. Not to go too much into like technicality, it was rendered using the real-time render engine which Blender has. And yeah, that also made it a lot faster. But it's great that I can see the image while I'm working on it. I don't need to wait for it to like render, and I can like make creative decisions and light things. So when I did the animatic, I already have all the lights. I have the fog and all the elements. So it's really important for me to be able to see that, because I don't do storyboards. I do the animatic in 3D. So having that real-time render engine was really like, it helped me like creatively. I could also try alternative versions of everything and very quickly like render them and see if they work. So it was really like, it was much easier for me to do it with Blender.
So did that also contribute to the look of the film, which is, again, not, we were talking before that in so many American films, every detail is rendered within an inch of its life. You can see every stitch in the character's sweater, and every hair is blowing in the wind, and every blade of grass in the lawn. And here it's more like brush strokes. You don't see the individual hairs on the cat, but just like a swath of color, as if you had gone in with a brush to render him.
Yeah, the approach was basically to have somewhat more detail in the environments to create that immersive feeling that you can like feel all these textures. But even if you like pause for a moment and look like deeply, it gives the impression that it's detailed, but it's actually quite abstract. Like that you see these brushstrokes, and we use detail where it's really necessary, and we avoid it where it's not necessary. And as opposed with actually the characters have less detail, and that's also by design. I didn't want that kind of uncanny valley feeling where it's really like hyper real, but not really. I think this way, I think the characters feel somewhat more appealing, and yeah, having them a little bit more abstracted and more graphic than the backgrounds. There's a great book by Scott McCloud where he talks about like this balance where the characters are somewhat more graphic. The book is called Understanding Comics. So and the backgrounds are more detailed to like have this balance. And actually, in a lot of hand-drawn classic films, you see these very detailed oil-painted or watercolor painted backgrounds, but the characters are just flat cells. And I think the audience can kind of suspend their disbelief and accept that. And yeah, I was kind of trying to approach that.
Yeah, Scott McCloud's done 3 books on sort of the theory of comics that are very interesting. Even you may not agree with all his ideas, but they're very well articulated and very interesting. Finally, the film has enjoyed a huge success, winning a lot of awards in the festival circuit, and now is appearing here. Of course, no one sets out hoping, to make a flop, but were you surprised at how well the film played, and in so many different countries, and to in some cases what weren't really animation audiences, but general film festival audiences.
I don't know. Like we hoped for that, and like we got like it was the best possible scenario. So yeah, I had hopes for that, but I was also like thinking realistically that it doesn't happen really. Like animation isn't selected in Cannes almost never, and so yeah, I think. We never even tested the film like with an audience. So for me, the first time seeing it was with like people outside of the team was in the premiere in Cannes, and so I had no idea how it would work. And like when I pitched it, it was kind of difficult to convey the idea that it works for both families, but it's also a film for adults. And usually they expect either one or the other, and I think it can work for both. And it's somewhat more unpredictable, but I think like taking these risks can actually pay off, and I think it's good to like see show films for kids, which somewhat more can challenge them in some ways, or kind of respects them, that they would understand these things, and you don't need to explain everything. And also like not just in terms of the story, but the way that it's told. That like you can like make films for families that are not just made with conventional coverage and basic like close-ups and wide shots, and you can like do some interesting things like these long takes. And so basically I think it's exceeded our expectations.
Well, just to reassure you, Miyazaki doesn't test his films either.
Yeah, it's really hard to like make a film that everyone will love. Like I think if you try to do that, you end up pleasing no one. It tends to be like too generic or broad. So I think you have to be very specific and make something personal. And hopefully my taste overlaps with some other people's, and as well because it is a smaller film. I think we don't need to like please everyone. If we find a small enough but very dedicated audience, that's enough. So that was our
Well, something that many artists, not only Miyazaki, but some of the people, Cartoon Saloon, for example's films, if you tell your story well and honestly, it becomes universal and appeals to a broader audience. Whereas if, as you're saying, if you go after, if you're trying to reach everyone at once, it goes bland.
Yeah, I guess through the personal you can achieve the universal.
So let us congratulate our guest on his film, which I hope you all enjoy. And thank you.
Thank you.